Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at chapter 45 from book 5 of Caesar's De Bello Gallico. So you might remember at this point we're going through the Gallic Wars, we're in 54 BCE, and we've had the attack, the ambush by Ambiorix. He's kind of rallied the troops, the Nervi in particular, are now attacking the camp of Cicero, right? That's where we kind of left off. And in the previous chapter, we saw that Caesar kind of took a deep dive into individual acts of heroism through his centurions, right? There was the pair of centurions, Varenus and Pullo, and how they kind of one up each other and they're fighting outside the walls. And it's a really kind of interesting chapter where we kind of zoom very close in and focus on two individuals. Now we're going to zoom back out and kind of get back to the overall siege and the overall narrative. Before we do that, though, like I always say in these videos, the first thing you want to do is you want to pre-read it, right? So try to go through the chapter, look at any vocab that you might need. This is where commentaries will help you a lot. A lot of them have vocab lists. I would start by learning all the new vocab just because it's really difficult to understand what's going on if you don't know what the words mean. So that should always be your first stop, right? Learn the new vocab. And try to read through it a little bit, just get a sense of the story and kind of what vocab and grammar you're going to see. And again, I say grammar because if you're using a commentary, you're going to see a lot of nice grammar tips laid out for you too. So I would always start there. Then what you want to do is read the story aloud. I say this in all the videos I make for De Bello Gallico, but I know a lot of times this is done in an AP class, and it's difficult, right? There's not a ton of time, and your time is really crunched and doing a lot of material. But if you can read it aloud, right, practice your speaking, your pronunciation. If you can find someone in class, they can work on their listening while you're reading it. And then you just kind of swap roles. So whoever you have as a partner can read the story back to you, right? Read the chapter back to you, and you can work on your listening skills. That's really important, right? That'll help you kind of lock it into your long-term memory. I know it sounds silly, and you might think you don't have enough time, but if you can find that time, that's how you really understand the language and bring it to life. And you're not just translating in your head where you're probably going to forget it, right? There's so much material in the AP. You've heard me say this before. A lot of students end up just trying to memorize English translations and guess on the test because there's so much to cover. If you try to actually work your way through it and read it and kind of activate different parts of your brain, it'll go into the long-term memory and help you out. When it does come time for actually translating it, again, I would always recommend you do the read and reread method. You've heard me say this before. It's a really good strategy. Read through the chapter, write down any problem areas you have, things you don't understand. When you're done, look at that commentary you're using, right? Or just look it up on your own, whatever it might be, and try to fill in those gaps so you can see where you're going wrong. If it's vocab, that's really easy. Just look up the words. If it's grammar, it's a little bit trickier. You might need like a commentary or something to help you out. Then you just keep repeating that process. And on the second, third, fourth time through, whatever it might be, it should get a lot easier to do. And you notice that your problem areas get kind of smaller, right? You have fewer and fewer of them until you can read this start to finish without needing any help. That's how you know you really understand it. You've locked it into that long-term memory, and that'll really help you when it comes time for the AP, if that's what you are doing, to actually nail that test so that you're not just guessing or trying to memorize an English translation, okay? So that's always what I would recommend. If you haven't done that, pause the video, work your way through. But for the rest of the video, we're just going to go through the translation, try to see if what you came up with matches what I did. It doesn't have to be perfect or exactly the same, but hopefully I can explain it for you a little bit, and then you'll be ready to move on. So again, where we're picking up is back in the action. So we kind of zoomed out, right, when we were looking at the full siege, what was going on with Cicero. Then we zoomed in when we looked at Varenus and Pullo, and now we're zooming back out again, right? So we're not having individual heroes in the story. It's kind of the big picture of the siege, okay? So the narrative picks up here. You have quanto erat in dies gravior atque asperior oppugnatio, et maxime quod magna parte militum confecta vulneribus res ad paucitatem defensorum pervenerat. Tanto crebriores literae nuntique ad Caesarem mitebantur. Okay, and then it kind of keeps going from there. But we're starting with that quanto and tanto. You have the correlatives here, which makes this a little bit trickier, right? But one way you could do this is to say, the more, right, with quanto. So there was, graver, more grave. And then in dies really means like daily, right? So let me backtrack. The word you're looking for here is oppugnatio, right? The fighting. So you could say the more the fighting was graver and more violent, right? Daily. So it's getting really kind of nasty, this siege. And he keeps going, he says, at maxima, and especially because, right? Then you have the ablative here. So you have magna parte militum, with a great part of the soldiers, confecta vulneribus, having been weakened by wounds, right? So it's saying that not only was the fighting getting more violent and kind of more serious or grave daily, right? In dies, you have gravior asperior. So it's getting worse and worse by the day. And especially this is happening because so much of the army is actually wounded, right? So magna parte militum confecta vulneribus, right? Was so much or was such a great part of the soldiers having been wounded, right? The race, the situation. You have the situation ad paucitatem defensorem pervenerat. The situation had come to to a scarcity of defenders. Paucitatem defensora means there's not a lot of Romans really left to fight, right? They're running out of people to kind of get up on the walls because so many of them are wounded, right? So the more this was going on, then you get to the tanto, right? So it says the more that the fighting got, grave and serious, especially because so many people were wounded, and the situation had come to like a scarcity of defenders. Then you get your tanto, the other half of the correlative. So you have tanto crebriores literae. So the more frequent letters, right, the literae, and nuntii, right, nuntiique, and messengers, mitebantor ad Caesarem, were being sent, mitebantor, right, they were being sent to Caesar. So it's saying the more that this goes on and the fighting is getting worse and worse and people are getting more the Romans are getting more injured, the more letters they send out. They're sending out more frequent letters. So this is showing the desperation. They're sending out letters, they're sending out messengers, they're trying to get to Caesar to tell him what's going on because they're stuck in this fort, okay? So the image you want to have is, again, really desperation, right? As the Romans are trying to fight through and they're trying to figure out what's going on. And they are actually sending men out. So this is kind of an interesting note too. There had to have been gaps in the Gallic lines, right? So the idea is if you're sending out letters and messages, there has to be a way to get them out. So they're really trusting these messengers to sneak through the lines, probably on horseback, right? You would imagine, probably at night, I would guess, because you're trying to secretly get a message out when you are besieged and surrounded. It's difficult, right? It's a really desperate situation. And then you get the other half of that line when we finish this kind of opening idea. It's talking about the messengers. You have quorum pars deprehensa in conspectu nostrorum militum cum cruciatu necebator, right? So they're sending out these messengers, which is kind of a dangerous thing to do. And now we see exactly why it's dangerous, right? You have pars quorum, so part of whom, right? It's referring to the messengers, right? The letters and the messengers, but really the messengers. So part of whom, having been taken, right? Deprehensa, they've been captured, right? Not only were they taken, but necebator, they were being killed in conspectu nostrorum militum, in sight, right? In conspectu, in the sight of nostrorum militum, our soldiers, okay? So the Gauls, the Nervi, are catching these messengers and killing them in front of the Romans, right? So that they can see them from the walls. And not only killing them, but they're killing them cum cruciatu, with torture, right? So it's a really kind of nasty scene of the Nervi catching these messengers who they know are really the hope of the Roman army. And just to kind of have this psychological warfare, they're dragging these men out and being like, hey, here's the guy you thought was your last hope. Watch us torture and kill him in front of you, right? So it's getting really, really violent. And it's showing the desperation of what's happening here. The Romans and Cicero are trying to get messengers and messages out. They're not making it through. And they know that because the messengers, right, the nunti, are coming back and being killed and tortured in front of them, right? They can see this from the wall. So not a great situation at all. Then you have erat unus intus nervius nomine vertigo. Loco natus honesto, qui a prima obsidione ad Ciceronem perfugerat, suamque ei fidem praestiterat, rather. Right? So there was one, unus, right? So there's one man. Intus means like within, right? So within the walls, I guess is one way to think of it, in the camp. There was one Nervi, and so Nervius there is describing someone of the Nervi, right? And this should catch your attention. You're like, wait, aren't the Nervi besieging the Romans? What's happening here? So there's one Nervian actually inside the camp, right on the Roman side, nomine Vertigo. His name is Vertigo, right? So there's this Roman Nervian, I guess you could say, a Nervian ally of Rome. Maybe that's a better way to say it. And he's in the camp, right? And he's there because of the next line. You have loco natus honesto. So having been born in an honorable station, right? A high place. So he's a noble is the idea. When it talks about loco honesto, he's not just some random Nervian. He's like a prince, right? A high level, maybe not a prince, but a high level Nervian, right? So he's a Roman ally. He's in the camp. Then you have qui a prime obsidione. So who from the first siege perfugerat ad Ciceronum, had fled to Cicero, right? So it's saying that, this guy had come to Cicero to basically help, right? He's on the Roman side, okay? And praestiterat, this is referring to Vertigo, right? He had displayed or showed his loyalty, suam fidem, right? His loyalty, to him. So the his is his own, it's the reflexive. So that's referring to Vertigo, right? The a is referring to Cicero. So it's saying Vertigo showed his own loyalty to Cicero, right? So Cicero has kind of an ace up his sleeve. He has a Nervian in his camp who's on his side. And you're going to see how this is going to play out and what he's going to use him for. Okay. But again, not all the Nervii are actually against the Romans. And this goes into the complicated political situation of what's happening in Gaul. And I encourage you to look it up. It's not as if these are like block nations, like the Romans are on one side and the Nervii on the other, and everything is kind of set that way. There's a lot of mixing, right? Some Gauls are with Rome, some aren't, and that's kind of what you're seeing here. So you have hic servo spe libertatis magnisque persuadet primis, ut litteras ad Caesarem deferat. So this man, right, Vertigo. So this man, and it refers to the slave. So he's going to do something to his slave, right? But this man persuaded. That's the verb you're looking for, right? So he persuades his slave, servo, right? His slave with hope, spe, right? So hope libertatis, so spe libertatis, hope of freedom, and magnisque primis, and great rewards. So Vertigo takes one of his slaves, right? And he says to him, hey, I'm going to give you great rewards. I'm going to give you your freedom, all this great stuff if you do something. And what does he tell him to do? You have ut, right? Here's your ut clause. You have ut litteras ad Caesarem deferat, that he might carry letters to Caesar. So the Nervian, Vertigo, is taking one of his Nervian slaves, right? One of his Gallic slaves. And he says, hey, I'm going to give you freedom. I'm going to give you great rewards if you carry the letter to Caesar, right? So this is like the last ditch effort to get a letter to Caesar. But the interesting thing here is this is not a Roman, it's a Gallic slave, right? So it's someone who would kind of blend in with the Nervi, which is kind of what we're going for here. Then you have has ille in Jaculo illegatas effert et Gallus inter Gallus sine ulla suspicione versatus ad Caesarem pervene, okay? So ille is really going to start that one, right? And you have effort, right? So he brings, effort, he carries or brings, has, meaning the letters. So you're saying that one brought these, meaning these letters, which is what they're referring to in the previous line. And it's letters illegatas in Jaculo, having been tied onto a spear. So the has illegatas, those two words are going together, right? Your accusative. So the letters have been tied to a spear, right? Onto a spear. And you have Gallus inter Gallus. So a Gaul among Gauls is what it's talking about. It's referring to that slave, the man. Remember, he's a Gaul and he's going to go among the Gauls. So he's going to blend in, right? So a Gaul among Gauls, he pervenit ad Caesarem. He arrived to Caesar without any suspicion kind of without having turned any suspicion, right? So in other words, and without having raised any suspicion. So the trick, it's not really a trick, but the strategy that Cicero does is he turns to Vertigo and he says, hey, we need to get a messenger through. And Vertigo says, let's use my slave, right? One of my slaves is a Gaul, right? So they basically disguise him, and you have this spy going into the Nervian ranks, a Gaul among Gauls, and it's someone that they wouldn't really notice, right? Why would you think twice about someone walking through the ranks who is of your people? So they assume he's part of the Gallic army, the Nervians, and he's not, right? And this man is able to sneak through the lines and get the letter to Caesar, okay? And the interesting thing happening here too is when it's talking about the letter, right? So the letter is described as being tied to a spear. So it's kind of a couple ways to interpret it, but it shows a little bit about how Caesar, how messages worked under Caesar. And he's known for kind of cryptography and using the Caesar cipher and things like that. What this is probably referring to is, if I remember correctly, and one of you could look this up, with a message, when you tie it to a spear, what you would do is kind of wrap the message around a spear and then put rope over it. So if I remember right, the message is actually hidden underneath like rope on the spear. You're not waving it like a flag. That would be kind of stupid, right? If you're walking around with a spear that has like a letter on it. But if you wrap it underneath the rope, this is a way of concealing a message that no one would understand what's going on. They also could have written it in a code, right? We don't know, but one way or another, it shows that there's spies and kind of subterfuge happening here. Okay, and then we get the last line. You have ab eo de periculis ciceronis legionesque cognoscitor, right? So from him, meaning from this Nervian slave, right, who's really like a spy sneaking through, it was learned, right? Cognoscitor, it was learned, or he learned, meaning Caesar learned about the periculis ciceronis legionis, right? So about the danger or the dangers of Cicero and the legion. So this is how Caesar finally hears about what's going on in Gaul. So you imagine he gets this letter delivered, he reads it, and he's like, okay, we have a major problem here. So finally, the Romans are able to really break through, because again, at this point, remember, they've tried to send messengers out and no one has gotten through. So this chapter is interesting when you see that the last way they actually get a message through in this desperate situation is to use a Nervian, right? A Gaul among Gauls. So just kind of an interesting little episode here. But again, that's all there is in the chapter, not particularly long. There are a few things to think about. There's nothing particularly crazy about this chapter, but it is interesting to notice that this is, only now is the time when Caesar actually realized what's been going on with Cicero, right? We had all this happen. We have the siege. We have, weeks of siege and all these heroic things happening. Caesar has no idea. So now he knows, and you're going to see Caesar's finally going to respond to kind of stomp this out. Okay. And I mentioned the image of the messenger hiding the message on the spear. I'd encourage you to look that up. There's a lot of cool things we know about ancient tactics to conceal messages. This is one, right? But it is kind of a neat trick to send a Gaul among the Gauls carrying a spear. Again, you're in a war zone. Why would anyone care? And it has a hidden message on it, right? It's kind of a cool way to think about it. But a bigger thing is the mental warfare, right, that's going on. Notice that the Nervi, now it's turning into something different, right? They're not able to defeat the Romans straight up in battle because the Romans are resisting, right? They're holding the fort. So now they turn to psychological tactics. This is where you start torturing Romans in front of their fellow comrades, right? The other soldiers. And it's meant to wear down the morale. So the Nervi, you can kind of see, I don't know if desperation is the right term, but you can see they're also trying to really wear the Romans out. I think it kind of speaks to how the Romans are holding their fortitude, right? They're seeing all this crazy stuff happen. They're seeing their friends getting tortured, and they're still holding the fort. It's kind of an interesting glimpse into the Roman mentality. And again, here we see, the role of Vertigo, right? The Gaul, right? So not all the Gauls are against the Romans. That's something I mentioned before, but it's not as simple as everyone joins the rebellion and now they're all against Caesar. That's not true. Not only for the Gauls, but also not only for the Nervi, right? You can see there's a Nervian here who is allied with the Romans, right? So just, again, the political dynamics are really interesting and something I'd encourage you to think about, okay? If you have any questions at all, put them in the comments below. Again, pretty short chapter, but an interesting one. And we're getting closer to the end of book 5. It's starting to wrap up the narrative. You can kind of see how everything's going to turn in the last few chapters. But if you have any questions at all, feel free to put them in the comments below. I'll be happy to help you out. But otherwise, keep at it. And again, try to read this, use a read and reread method, to repeat this until you're able to go start to finish without too much trouble. There's a few kind of trickier parts of the grammar here. This is where a commentary will help you out. But if you need anything, let me know. Otherwise, keep at it. And if you feel you're able to do this without too much difficulty, that's a good sign that you're ready to move on. Good luck.